What if almost everything we think we know about Rapa Nui is wrong? What if the island that became famous as the ultimate warning of human self-destruction was never really the story of collapse we were told? And what if those giant stone faces, staring across the Pacific for centuries, were never symbols of failure at all, but evidence of something far more intelligent, far more organized, and far more resilient than science once believed? For decades, Rapa Nui, also known as Easter Island, was presented as a cautionary tale. The version most people heard sounded simple. A small society arrived on one of the most isolated islands on Earth. They carved giant statues. They cut down trees. They exhausted their resources. Their population crashed, and their civilization collapsed. And because of that, it spread everywhere. Because the deeper researchers looked into Rapa Nui, the stranger that old explanation became. The soil did not fully support it. The settlement patterns did not fully support it. And now, discoveries from genetics, climate science, hydrology, and ancient plant residues are all pointing in the same direction. Rapa Nui may not have collapsed the way the world was told. It may have adapted, and that changes everything. Rapa Nui sits deep in the southeastern Pacific, thousands of miles from major landmasses. It is one of the most remote inhabited islands on the planet. At first glance, it almost looks like the last place where sophisticated society could create one of the most iconic, monumental landscapes in human history. And yet, that is exactly what happened. Hundreds of moai were carved there. Massive ceremonial platforms were built there. Roads crossed the island. Agriculture developed in difficult conditions. Social systems lasted for centuries. None of that looks accidental. None of that looks simple. And none of that looks like a people blindly racing toward destruction. That is where the new discovery becomes so powerful, because researchers are now finding that the statues may have been closely tied to one of the most important survival resources on the island: fresh water. On Rapa Nui, fresh water was never abundant. There are no major rivers, no long permanent streams. No easy inland water system feeding the whole island. Water was always limited, and on a place like this, limited resources decide everything. Scientists studying the locations of ceremonial platforms and statues found something impossible to ignore. Again and again, these major sites lined up with places where groundwater reached the coast. In other words, many of the island's most famous monuments were not placed randomly at all. They appear to cluster near life-sustaining freshwater access. And if that is true, then the moai were never just monuments to power. They may also have marked the geography of survival itself. That single idea changes the entire story. Because once freshwater becomes the center of the map, the rest of Rapa Nui starts making more sense. Why were major ceremonial sites built where they were? Why were certain coastal zones so important? Why did communities organize themselves around those points? Why did monument building remain meaningful even under pressure? The answer may be that these were not vanity projects. They were part of a larger system, a system linking belief, territory, leadership, cooperation, and control over vital resources. And suddenly, the old story begins to crack. Because if the moai were connected to survival itself, then the people who built them were not irrational destroyers. They were marking the most valuable places on the island. What looks mysterious from the outside may actually be a map carved in stone. And then the story becomes even more intense. Because if fresh water was the hidden key to Rapa Nui, then climate may have been the force that changed the entire game. New climate evidence suggests that Rapa Nui may have experienced a prolonged drought so severe that it quietly transformed the island over generations. Not in one dramatic moment, not in a single catastrophic event, but slowly, relentlessly, year after year, generation after generation. For a long time, people imagined Rapa Nui's decline as something self-inflicted, as if the islanders simply made terrible choices and destroyed their own future. But paleoclimate research is now suggesting a very different possibility. Scientists studying ancient sediment records believe a major drop in rainfall may have begun around the mid-1500s and lasted for centuries. Think about that for a moment. Not a bad season, not a difficult decade, a shift in climate that lasted across lifetimes. On a small volcanic island where fresh water was already limited, That kind of drying would change everything. Crops become harder to maintain. Inland water sources become less dependable. Soil moisture drops. Food security becomes fragile. And any place where clean groundwater still reaches the coast becomes more valuable than ever before. Now the Moais start to look different once again. Because if those monuments were tied to freshwater locations, then during a long drought, they would not just be symbols of ancestry or prestige. They would stand at the exact places where survival still had a chance. That changes the emotional meaning of the entire landscape. These were not statues standing in the ruins of a dead civilization. They may have been anchors in a living emergency. And here's what makes this idea so compelling. The drought theory does not require the people of Rapa Nui to be foolish. It does not assume chaos as the default explanation. It does not reduce their history to failure. Instead, it suggests they were facing environmental pressure on a scale most people today rarely imagine. And the archaeological record shows signs of adaptation, not surrender. One of the clearest examples is agriculture. Rapa Nui farmers developed rock gardens, a method that may look simple at first glance, but reveals remarkable environmental knowledge once you understand what it does. Stones spread across cultivated land can reduce evaporation, protect crops from harsh wind, help regulate temperature, and improve growing conditions in poor volcanic soil. That is not the behavior of a society that gave up. That is engineering. That is resilience. That is human intelligence responding to pressure. Recent studies also suggest that these rock gardens may not have covered nearly as much of the island as some older theories claimed. That means the pre-contact population may have remained smaller and more stable than the dramatic collapse narrative once suggested. In other words, Rapa Nui may never have supported the giant population estimates that made the old ecocide theory sound inevitable. And if the population stayed relatively modest, then the logic of runaway self-destruction becomes even weaker. So now the picture begins to change. Freshwater mattered, drought mattered, adaptation mattered. And once you place those pieces together, Rapa Nui stops looking like a warning tale about reckless collapse. It starts looking like a case study in strategic survival under extreme environmental stress. But then came one of the biggest tests of the old theory. Ancient de ene. If a civilization truly collapses, it usually leaves scars. Not just in ruins, not just in abandoned sites, but in the genetics of the people who lived through it. That is why the old Rapa Nui collapse story was tested through biological evidence. Researchers examined ancient genomes from historical Rapa Nui individuals, expecting that if the classic collapse theory were true, they would find evidence of a severe population bottleneck before European contact. In simple terms, if the island had suffered a massive internal collapse, the genetic record should show it clearly, but it didn't. And that absence is huge, because the genetic evidence does not support the idea that Rapa Nui society destroyed itself before Europeans arrived. Instead, the findings suggest something far less dramatic, and in many ways far more impressive. A small population that remained resilient over time and continued without the catastrophic implosion that had been repeated in books, documentaries, and popular culture for years. That means one of the world's most famous historical stories may have been built on a misunderstanding. And then came the second shock. The same genetic research found Native American ancestry in ancient Rapa Nui individuals. And the timing suggests that this contact happened before Europeans ever reached the island. Just think about that. Across one of the largest oceans on Earth, long before colonial ships entered the region, there may already have been contact linking Polynesian voyagers and indigenous peoples of the Americas. That is not a small correction to history. That is a scientific earthquake, because for generations, Rapa Nui was framed as almost impossibly isolated, trapped at the edge of the world. But if people crossed or connected across the Pacific before European arrival, then the island was not simply a closed system waiting to fail. It was part of a much wider human story of navigation, encounter, exchange, and extraordinary maritime skill. And archaeology is now reinforcing that possibility in an almost cinematic way. At Anakina, the earliest known settlement on the island, researchers studied microscopic starch grains stuck to obsidian tools. These tiny traces are ancient food residues, and they can reveal what people were cutting and preparing centuries ago. The results were stunning. Among the plant traces were classic Polynesian crops such as taro and yam, but there were also crops associated with South America, including sweet potato and cassava. That matters, because these were found in very early settlement layers, suggesting that the connection between Rapa Nui and the Americas may go back to the earliest phases of the island's history. The farther science goes, the harder the old image of total isolation becomes to defend, and the harder the collapse story becomes to simplify. Because now, Rapa Nui is no longer just the island of the Mo'i, it is the island of hidden water, climate stress, agricultural innovation, genetic resilience, and pre-European, transoceanic connection. But for many people, the greatest mystery of Rapa Nui has always been movement. How did they move those giants? How do you carve enormous statues from volcanic stone, some weighing many tons, and then transport them across a rugged island without modern machinery, industrial wheels, or metal engineering tools? For years, that question helped fuel the myth that the islanders must have consumed huge quantities of timber in a reckless frenzy to move the Mo'i. And once that image spread, it became one more piece in the larger collapse story. But once again, science tells a more sophisticated story. Experimental archaeology has shown that large statues may have been moved upright in a controlled rocking motion, almost as if they were walking. Researchers tested this idea with a replica Mo'i and showed that a coordinated team using ropes could move it surprisingly efficiently. It sounds unbelievable until you picture the rhythm. Pull from one side, then the other. Tip and recover, tip and recover. Step by step. And that idea fits something else found on the island. Roads. Ancient pathways on Rapa Nui were not just random tracks across the land. In several places, they appear shaped in ways that may have helped guide the movement of these tall, heavy statues. Their size and form make much more sense if statue transport was a repeated, organized process rather than chaotic improvisation. And that matters for a very simple reason. A society that can repeatedly carve, coordinate, transport, and erect monuments at this scale is not disorganized. It is not barely surviving season to season. It is capable of planning, labor management, ritual coordination, and technical problem solving over long periods of time. In other words, the Mo'i do not point to madness. They point to mastery. There is also evidence suggesting that the quarry itself may not have been just an extraction zone. Research at the statue carving area has revealed fertile soils and signs of cultivation, meaning the place where the giants were shaped may also have helped support life directly. That blurs the line between ritual and practicality even more. On Rapa Nui, sacred landscapes and survival landscapes may have been deeply connected. And once you begin to see that pattern, the whole island transforms. The platforms are not just ceremonial stages. The statues are not just oversized icons. The roads are not just pathways. The coastline is not just scenery. Everything becomes part of a larger system, linking belief, food, labor, water, and territory. That is why the old story now feels too small. It flattened a complex civilization into a simple morality tale. Science is bringing the complexity back, and with that comes one final twist. Because if Rapa Nui did not destroy itself the way the world believed, then what actually caused the deep suffering and decline recorded in later history? That answer is darker, and sadly, more familiar. Because the real collapse may not have come from inside the island at all. It may have arrived from the outside. The deeper science goes into Rapa Nui, the more one conclusion keeps returning. This was not a people defined by self-destruction. This was a people defined by endurance. For centuries, they lived on one of the most isolated inhabited islands on Earth. They built monuments the world still recognizes instantly. They organized labor at a remarkable scale. They identified and protected freshwater access. They developed ways to grow food in harsh volcanic terrain. They endured environmental pressure. And the genetic record now suggests they did all of this without the catastrophic pre-European collapse once treated as fact. That does not mean life on Rapa Nui was easy. It wasn't. The island was demanding. Water was limited. Climate pressures may have intensified after the 1500s. Social and ritual systems changed. Monument traditions shifted. New belief systems emerged. But change is not the same as collapse. Adaptation is not the same as failure, and a civilization transforming under pressure is not proof that it destroyed itself. That distinction matters, because for too long, Rapa Nui was used as a simplified lesson about what humans do wrong. But the new evidence suggests it may be just as important as a lesson in what humans can do, right under extreme constraints. They adapted. They reorganized. They endured. And when devastating decline finally came in the historical era, it appears to have been driven not by ancient self-destruction, but by the brutal forces that followed outside contact. Disease, slave raids, and colonial disruption. That is a very different moral from the one the world was taught. So now, when you look at the Moai, maybe you are looking at them the wrong way if you only see mystery. You should also see intelligence. You should see geographic precision. You should see environmental knowledge. You should see social coordination. You should see memory fixed into stone. And maybe most importantly, you should see a warning about how easily complex human histories can be reduced into convenient myths. Because once a dramatic narrative takes hold, people repeat it. Books repeat it. Media repeats it. Classrooms repeat it. And eventually, the legend becomes stronger than the evidence. Until science catches up. And right now, science is catching up to Rapa Nui. The statues may have marked water. The drought may have reshaped sacred geographies. The fields may reveal resilience, not ruin. The DNA may have shattered the collapse myth, and the food traces may prove that the island was connected to a much larger world than anyone once believed. That is why this discovery is shaking science to its core, not because it adds one more mystery to Easter Island, but because it removes one of the biggest misunderstandings in modern history. Rapa Nui was never just a story about how a society dies. It may be one of the greatest stories of how a society survives. And that completely changes the way those stone faces stare back at us. Because maybe they were never watching the end. Maybe they were guarding the island through centuries of impossible odds, waiting for the rest of the world to finally understand what they had been saying all along. This was not failure. This was resilience written in stone. That's it for today. But here on our Explorers, we do not stop where the mystery begins. We go where the evidence gets uncomfortable. So if you want more hidden history, lost civilizations, and discoveries that rewrite everything, make sure you subscribe, turn on the bell, and keep exploring with us. And trust me, the next mystery is even bigger.